All right, guys, welcome to Monday. We have a couple of things going on this week. First, we have to finish our notes. Then, we are going to try to squeeze in a writing workshop on Wednesday. We'll do one of the short essays, or we'll talk about one of the civic literacy essay questions. Then, review Thursday, exam on Friday. Your assignments for this week, you have Journal 28. There are no readings this week, it is just your notes from in class. You have the why I wrote the Crucible questions. Please respond to those in complete sentences. And then you have your short paper, which is due on Friday. So let's pick back up where we left off with the Korean War on Friday. As we were discussing, when you look at the participants in the Korean War, we start to see this threat of World War III coming. The United States is participating through the United Nations, sending forces that way. As we compete in Korea, China also lends their hand to North Korea. And with those big world powers starting to participate in this conflict, World War III looks like it's on the horizon. It's those alliances. Again, the alliances get us into these bigger global conflicts. There's going to be two real perspectives when it comes to how do we approach Korea. You are going to have the people who side with General Douglas MacArthur, who believe that we should turn this into an example, that we should not just appease and split Korea in half. We should exterminate communism from Korea and expand that search into China and turn this into an all-out war. Um, it MacArthur will say there's no substitute to victory. We must continue to fight. And Truman really sees the writing on the wall here, and he says that we cannot continue this war. We're in no position to go into a greater conflict such as a world war this closely to getting out of World War II. So, MacArthur is going to go to Congress. He is going to write letters to different representatives, including the House Republican leader, and he's going to share his sentiments on declaring all out war on China. This is a direct going against the orders of Truman. There is no substitution for what he did here. Those letters will be leaked to the press, and when they are leaked, Truman really doesn't have any other solution here than to fire General Douglas MacArthur for insubordination, which he does. We are going to see an election in 1952 that kind of happens in the middle of a stalemate in the Korean War. Stalemate meaning that no side is winning or gaining territory. They are just continuing to fight, and there is just a substantial loss of life happening. The Korean War becomes a talking point and a real issue in the election of 1952. The Republican Dwight D. Eisenhower is going to win this election in 1952 in a landslide victory against the Democrat Stevenson. And you can see from the map there that it truly is a landslide. It's reminiscent of the FDR map in 1932. What's important about this change of hands here is that this is the first Republican president that we've seen in 20 years. Remember, FDR came into the presidency in 1932. He was a Democrat. He got elected into 4 terms. Then you have Truman, and now you have a Republican. Eisenhower, as he was campaigning, is going to push that there needs to be a ceasefire in Korea, and he knew just how to bring about that ceasefire. the way that he was going to bring it about is by threatening nuclear weaponry. Now, this is going to be unique to the United States because we've done it before. So when we threaten nuclear weaponry, that threat lands different. And it does here, and it pushes Korea to establish the demilitarized zone. That is going to be at the 38th parallel, and that gives this kind of buffer. It's 2 miles wide. It still exists today. It is the division, the new boundary between North and South Korea. When we look at the death toll, as short as the Korean War was, nearly 5 million people die in this conflict. And out of those 5 million people, more than half are going to be civilians. And this really is indicative of how much war has changed. Because of the advancement in weaponry, we see that it's not just a conflict of combat anymore. There are civilians that get lost in the crossfire, and this is only going to grow as we move into conflicts to come. I want to take a look today at the Cold War and what the changes within the Cold War really mean for the United States. First, I want to start with a video here, and I want you to listen about Nuketown, USA, and think about what is the purpose of having Nuketown and what was the U.S. preparing for? Why did we have to prepare for this?
Now, for civil defense, another realistic test is held. In a two-story house on Main and Elm Streets, a Manneken family waits, 3,500 feet from atomic destruction. They're lifeless dummies, but to the civil defense officials testing bomb shelters, they could help save lives. A second home stands a mile away. America is seeking through these drills to strengthen home front defenses, for their strength means our safety. Dozens of cars are on the streets of the ghost hamlet in Nevada. And marching to within 2 miles of the blast center, 1,500 GIs take cover in slit trenches, closer to an atomic explosion than any human being since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The blast's blinding flash silhouettes observers 7 miles away. Then its ugly mushroom cloud swirls skyward. Within an hour, the dirt-caked troops, all safe, have abandoned their foxholes and are pushing through a veil of dust as GIs pointing Geiger counters lead the way. The closest house is leveled by the blast, equal to 15,000 tons of TNT, but small as A-bombs go. The second building, 7,500 feet from the explosion, still stands. Although protected by every device known to atomic scientists, troops are unable to penetrate to the blast center for many hours because of the deadly radioactive contamination shrouding the area. Val Peterson, Civil Defense Director, warns us to prepare, for this could be your house and your window. Here again, the atomic blast. 3,500 feet away, a split second later, past one of the cars exposed to the atomic fury, a civil defense official finally is able to reach the rubble of the two-story house we just saw topple. Almost unbelievably, mannequins in the basement bomb shelter are found to be unharmed. The second house seems to have suffered comparatively minor damage. Windows have been blown in. All Americans must work together, for the stronger our home front defenses, the less the chance an atomic attack will come.
Okay, so turn to your partner. I'm going to give you about a minute here. Talk about what is the purpose and what are we preparing for? Why are we preparing for it? Hopefully, we got to the point where we described the purpose as preparing the United States for an atomic attack, or just warning the people that an attack could be coming. And this advertisement, I don't want to call it an advertisement, but this informational video here was meant to show people what does an atomic bomb look like, what would happen if it happened here, and it's to push this unification of the United States. These are two things that we're going to talk about and continue to trace through today. First, I want to talk about the nuclear side of things. When we look at the who has nuclear capabilities, the Soviets are going to reveal in 1949 that they have nuclear capabilities. This is going to be incredibly scary for the United States. When we think about where we've come over a period of time, pre-World War II, we had signed the disarmament, remember the Washington Naval Disarmament Conference in the early 1920s. The United States was dead set on disarming or restricting arms around the world. And now, just 27 years later, we are in a nuclear competition. This nuclear arms race is really going to start in World War I, between Germany, France, Britain, the United States, but it's going to continue into World War II, and we harness these nuclear capabilities. The United States, of course, will use the nuclear capabilities on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. We tried discouraging other countries from developing and using nuclear bombs by using the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The whole point, yes, was to bring Japan to surrender, but it was also to scare countries just enough that they wouldn't use the nuclear capabilities too. What we realize is that's not true. It doesn't discourage. The Soviets are going to test their own atomic bomb. They are going to have it, and this pushes the United States to want to come up with the next best thing. So what does the United States start testing in 1952? We start testing the hydrogen super bomb. Truman, after hearing about the Soviets having these nuclear capabilities, develops what's called the Atomic Energy Commission. And the goal of the Atomic Energy Commission was to make the next biggest bomb, have these intercontinental ballistic missiles, and push the arms race to a whole new level. This competition between the United States and the Soviet Union is going to continue throughout the duration of the Cold War. We are trying to figure out how to get the best, the biggest, the most weapons. Now, what pushes the United States and Soviet Union not to use them against each other? We will threaten, right? That's the whole point of the Cold War. We threaten, but we don't use. What stops us from using is what's known as mutually assured destruction. Now, this is a policy between the United States and the Soviet Union because each of us want to avoid war, and the way we're going to avoid war is by building up enough weapons to absolutely destroy the other. And in a sense, this prevents the other side from attacking each other. Mutually assured destruction. The word mutually means shared. Assured is an understanding, and we know what destruction means. So there's this unspoken policy between the United States and Soviet Union in this nuclear arms race that we are going to avoid war, but we're going to avoid it by having the biggest stockpile of weapons that would absolutely destroy the other side. This mutually assured destruction. To continue with these ideas in the nuclear arms race, Eisenhower is going to, when he comes into the presidency in 1952, really continue the policy of containment. He, like Truman, wants to weaken the Soviet bloc by cutting them off economically, making sure that they don't get to expand, that there are no more, that we are not seeing more satellite countries pop up. So he will push to continue the policy of containment. But he has this very scary Secretary of State who you see on the screen there. His name is John Foster Dulles. Dulles is very anti-communist, but the difference between Dulles and Eisenhower is Secretary of State John Foster Dulles believes in no gray area. You are either a part of the free world or you are a part of the Soviet bloc. There is no in between. He's going to be very dramatic in his understanding. In a Life magazine interview, Dulles described how he passed the word to Chinese and North Koreans that unless the communist powers signed the Korean armistice, the United States would unleash its atomic arsenal. So Dulles is really the one that is behind this idea of what becomes known as massive retaliation. North Korea, you're not going to sign the armistice, the peace treaty? Well, then we're going to use our biggest, most powerful nuclear weapon against you. That is massive retaliation. That is going to the extreme. Some may call this overreacting. Maybe you know somebody who you may think of when you hear massive retaliation. Always going to the edge, the brink, and just going to the extreme, even in the smallest of situations. That's John Foster Dulles. Another idea that is going to be associated with Dulles and how he runs his time as Secretary of State is brinkmanship. Because of his massive retaliation and his almost overreaction, the other concept that is associated with him is called brinkmanship. Maybe you've heard the saying, going to the brink, or you push me to the brink. It is this going to the edge but not falling over. And this is associated with Dulles in the fact that when he threatens this massive retaliation, that takes us to the brink of war. You're going toe-to-toe with these countries and threatening to go over the edge and use that super bomb and not really thinking about the consequences, right? Because the consequences here, if we go toe-to-toe with someone and we threaten that massive retaliation, those nuclear arms, what happens if we use them? Or what happens if the threat gets them to use it? That pushes us over the edge into a war that we aren't quite ready for. That's what makes John Foster Dulles so scary, this idea of massive retaliation. It really plays with and goes against that mutually assured destruction because he's threatening, I'll destroy us all. I don't care if I go down with us. We'll go to the edge of war. So the nuclear arms race really is this dramatic time in United States history because we've already used the atomic bomb and we are threatening at points, manipulating other countries to do what we want them to do with the threat that we'll do it again. Now, the other part of what is going on in the United States is what I want you to watch here. There's going to be a little bit of paranoia in the United States beyond the nuclear weapons. I want you to listen for who is the audience of this short, what is the purpose, and what is the point of view.
Therefore, propaganda is vastly more important in democratic societies.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist. If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, or organizations labeled communist by the Department of Justice, she may be a communist. If a person defends the activities of communist nations while consistently attacking the domestic and foreign policy of the United States, she may be a communist. If a person does all these things over a period of time, he must be a communist. But there are other communists who don't show their real faces, who work more silently.
Okay, I want you to turn to your partner next to you and identify who the audience is, what is the purpose, and what is the point of view. And I'll give you about a minute here. Okay, so hopefully we got to the point where the audience is the American people. The purpose is to warn that communists are among us. And the point of view is that we have to find the communists, right? We cannot have them living among us. We need to be able to be informed enough to spot a communist. The Cold War at home is really going to look like the second Red Scare. Remember, in the first Red Scare, we had seen a successful communist revolution in Russia, and we were terrified that that would spread to the United States, that our democracy would be destroyed, and that we had to protect ourselves. The same thing is going to happen during the Cold War. Not that we just saw a successful communist revolution, but look at what Russia did in World War II. Look at the Red Army. Look at how strong they are. And looking at China, right? We're seeing communism expand. We're seeing the conflict in Korea. This is going to make people in the United States very nervous that communism will come to the United States, and that when it does, our democracy will be destroyed. So we have this innate fear that there are communists in the government. So the government is going to take actions throughout the 1940s in order to prevent communists from infiltrating the United States government. One of the actions that was taken, Truman is going to sign an executive order that is known as the Loyalty Order. And this is going to mandate that all federal employees have to take a loyalty oath and be determined whether they are sufficiently loyal to the government. It is very interesting to hear about these loyalty checks, because coming off of that video, it's very subjective in how we spot a communist. It's very subjective to determine if you're loyal enough to your country. And even if you supported communism or not, this may not be the way to figure it out. But these loyalty checks, they made people feel safer. They made it feel like the government was taking an action to protect from communists infiltrating our government. So it helped. This is really showing us that the Red Scare is hitting the United States, and it is this time period, the second Red Scare, following World War II, the end of the 1940s into the 1950s, and it is the second wave, and we are still fearful that there is going to be destruction of our democracy. There will be some legislation that is passed to combat against communism here in the United States. The first piece I want to take a look at is the Smith Act. The goal and the purpose of the Smith Act was to weaken the Communist Party. And the way in which it did it is that the Smith Act made it illegal to teach or advocate for the overthrow of the United States government. So you could not teach or advocate for the overthrow of the United States government. There's going to be a court case that challenges this idea, Dennis versus United States. Raymond Dennis was a member of the Communist Party, and he is going to argue that the Smith Act violated the First Amendment, because the whole point of the First Amendment is to be able to criticize your government. The Supreme Court is going to find that the Communist Party presented a clear and present danger to the United States, and the Smith Act could therefore limit free speech. Now that connects directly back to World War I in Schenck versus United States, upholding this idea that speech or civil liberties can be limited with this national security in mind. So Dennis versus United States says, your rights can be limited if it means protection of the United States. Furthermore, the McCarran Act was passed, and this brings back immigration quotas that we saw during the first wave of the Red Scare, and this was an attempt to bring back those quotas on immigrants coming from communist countries. It was meant to prevent communists coming to the United States, and when it gets to Truman's desk, Truman is going to veto the McCarran Act, saying that this is un-American, it's inhumane. We are supposed to be a nation of immigrants. But this veto is overridden by Congress. And that just goes to show it's not easy to override a veto, right? It takes 2/3 of Congress, not just the House, not just the Senate, 2/3 of Congress to agree to override this veto. We had a very large portion of people who were terrified that communists were going to come to the United States and destroy our government. And the McCarran Act being passed over Truman's veto is an example of this. Now, when you think of the McCarran Act, it's very similar to the Emergency Quota Act, attempting to put limitations on immigrants coming to the United States. All of this is sounding very familiar. At least it should sound very familiar. We have done this before. The United States is going to, again, look to within and how do we find communists. In 1938, the House of Un-American Activities Committee, also known as HUAC, is going to be formed to investigate not just communists, but also fascist organizations in the United States that had become active during the Great Depression. And the goal is to find the activity, prosecute that activity, and make sure that the United States is safe. When we look at HUAC, this is going to be a committee in the House of Representatives. That's why it's called the House, right? So it looks very much like a panel that would interview and investigate. But when you look at the House of Representatives, they do have what is called subpoena power. And what that means is if you get served, you have to appear in front of this committee. It is a legal order that you appear. You can't just skip it. So that's where this committee is going to have a lot of its power, is they will serve subpoenas. They will call people before this committee to be interviewed, and you are sworn in. It's very much like a court hearing. You are supposed to be sworn to tell the truth and be interviewed and asked all of the questions. Typically, if there was someone who was suspicious of being communist, they would be subpoenaed to appear before the committee. Suspected communists were grilled about their political beliefs, their activities, asked to provide names of other people. They were supposed to identify anybody else who was a suspected communist. And this committee, these subpoenas really fueled the fear of communists because people were under pressure. Imagine being called in front of the House of Representatives committee and you're being asked to provide a list of names, and these people are saying to you, I know you know who the communists are. I know you know somebody else. And under pressure, you give more names. And oftentimes that really did happen. And if people refuse to answer questions, pleading the fifth, taking their right to not incriminate themselves, people took that as, well, then I guess you're just communist. Then that proves what we're even thinking. And once you got called in front of HUAC, it really was detrimental to their livelihood, their careers. A lot of people are going to be blacklisted by employers from appearing or being subpoenaed in front of HUAC. They'll lose their jobs. And what we're going to see is a big target of HUAC is going to be the Hollywood industry. Really, because if you think about it, who can tell us what to think without telling us what to think? Who can manipulate our brains without outwardly manipulating our brains? Well, that's the movie industry, right? That's commercials. That's the advertisements we see. That is Hollywood. And we are going to see a very famous group of people be subpoenaed in front of HUAC, and that group is the Hollywood 10. The Hollywood 10 are going to be a group of 10 members of the movie industry. These are directors, actors, writers, producers, executives that are going to be called in front of HUAC. They refuse to answer any questions. Using their Fifth Amendment right to silence, the group is going to be held in what's called contempt of court because they refuse to answer any questions. They will be sent to prison under the idea that they were obstructing the proceedings of finding communists. And what ends up happening is these people, they lose their jobs. They don't get to work in the industry again, and they will challenge what was done to them. And that court case is Watkins versus U.S. And the Supreme Court in this court case is going to declare that witnesses that come before HUAC, they don't have to name radicals of who they know. Because what happened when the Hollywood 10 said, I'm not saying anything, I plead the fifth, they assumed that they were communist. They assumed that they had a list of people that they were hiding. And the assumption was incorrect. They just refused to play into the hand of this committee and instead chose to remain silent. And the Supreme Court is going to say, you have the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and you can't have that used against you. That is what it says in the Bill of Rights. The House of Un-American Activities Committee, we are going to continue to talk about tomorrow because it grows and it aids in this fire that spreads through the United States that there are communists on the prowl. And the Hollywood 10 are just one example of people who really had their lives destroyed during this time. I want you to remember your write your assignments that you have for this week. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know. I will be back tomorrow. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.